Recognition of time sequence times calculation times pi. Running lines of programs. Gather, modify, execute, correlations into platform into 3 lines of W, which is 3 lines of weather. Now understand what in position location is binary is a real-line communication to reset the location setting to your algorithms and understand how to come into your own webbing system. Because when you come into your own algorithm, you're creating a website. Your webbing system is extremely important for your data processing. Knowing what you're going into levels puts you in a symbolism location in your settings, but it's bringing everything down to one number. One number, a decimal in that position of the coefficient high center interference. Get in that communication lines and ground lines. You get a triangulation. Split that. Right? So that's set position of 1 point lines of 5. 1 point lines of 5 sets position lines of traction. Adding plus line screen location is 3 lines of measure. Right? So you determine how you process your formula and your equations to your programmers that you are through programming. Everything is given to you through a program. Until they're activated, they're programs. When they get activated, they're programmers. Now they come into more justification system how to use that through its calculation setting. But the team has to recognize all lines of communications to go back in the past, the present, and the future through decimal points, through power points. Get in that lines of communication setting. All right, this is general AI, space-time, getting lines of correlations into also communication size interference, intra-communications. All right, how you really communicate to yourself as a computer line. All right, setting communication high interference in line applications. Before we get started, there's no Q&A. I'll be off grid, but be online in travels. In communications, any questions, go through DM. All right, directing lines of symbols. Let's correlate to highest interference. Triangulation of flux over lines in one. Triangulation. Start with that setting. All right, process line. 4-track division. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay, 4 lines of central settings, right? Sets position of 0.1. Okay, 0.1 at the top. Sets core lines 2 panels. Line track correlation lines of 0. Sets lines of 1 signal into a half pipe. Set position of the point lines of 1, 1 in track location. Now, this is all through a clocking system, guys. Very powerful stuff, especially more for information lines of Gypsy, because she's the stargates and portals through lines of Tither. Sending lines of communication high center, how you see triangulation of 4 lines of communications. Very complicated stuff, but it's a lot of fun through travel. Understanding metric meters of scales and balance, communication highs, ground lines, communication lines of flux over line, website, screen lines, adaptation to 2 panels, 3 questions, lines, execute, core lines of high center running sequence. Set position of 0 gravity. All right, 0 gravity lines of 1, and position lines of ozone is set position. Travel point lines of center, and travel in through lines of graph communication system, puts all of the track locations in downshift line screen. Directing communication high center interference. Split lines of anomaly. Rotate the service at 1, 0 lines. Decimal point over 2. Setting communication ground centers. Flick the switch in screen lines and adaptation lines of surface. Okay. So measures and scale lines of communication lines of 4 line signals and track location of center communications. All right. Then we take the line position of 0.1, 1, and 0.1. Sets position lines of travels and center communication lines, fluxing screen lines adaptations, all communication lines of center interactions. Oh, it's not there because it doesn't recognize you through energy. Is it there? Yes, it is. See? Down through equation. Center core system line calculation setting. Sets units, lines of core. And this tracks lines of equilibrium and line rotation service. So all you're creating is a primer. You are the primer. You're looking at all lines of communication of primer circuits. That's how you guys are connected to primates. It's the multiple levels into the atmosphere lines in position of travel into the existing of systematical system. Position lines of programs, directing lines of core centers into relays, core centers, high center interference, into intelligence of its mind, of the existing location setting to primates. Now that process, your communication settings, how you see it through calculation lines of travel, right? 4 lines, high center interference, and symbolism, location setting to travel communications. All right, now, understanding line screen is all direct signals and how you come into decimal points. Let's go through pi. Okay, pi equals lines. Okay, we got a pi line. Pi equals. Then we go into all in sequence and position lines of 2 arrow points, point lines of track location system of travel. Directing lines of communication. A lot more through all levels of division, right? Set position lines of high center interference of 0, 0 equals lines of 1 equals lines of 0.1. Oh, The one's not there. It's gone, right? Because the energy is too high. So I have to do it again. Do you see it? Now it's bounced, all right? So you have to understand how to use your outposts. You have to understand how to use your outgoing mail. Get in that communication setting, you have a 40-line signal. That puts positions on 48 track location in your systems in 48 frames, position of 72 computer frames into 144 platform. 0, 1 equals lines, high set position of 1, 1, and position lines of 4 and track location of setting. Right? Is it there? Is it there? Yes. All right. So it's amazing how you basically come in your own formula. Setting lines of travel into 4 measure, setting communication lines of 1 signal, 1 center of flux over a screen. Now, change communication lines of its formula, you got a track location grid. See? Setting communication high center interference, line travels, point lines of grounds, point lines of center, and point lines of position of its atmosphere set position. Travel communication ground centers over lines over 6, over 3, over flux over 4. Setting communication ground lines into black holes and rotation spin cycles and track location system all through measure. Very powerful stuff. Change communication high center interference into the atmosphere line screen adaptation of surface interactions. Directing core centers into flux over 1, flux over 2, I line division in I circles, and I spectrum, and high direct signals of modification. Oh, it's not there. See? The energy is too high, so it disappears. That's what the test is on, guys. You see it or you don't see it. Then we go in position location to a setting and track location to a system through teleportation. Vessel communication grounds, high center interference of flux line, directing in position lines of 2 line screens, directing all communication center in position lines of travels, and set position of kaleidoscope and communication lines of tango and foxtrot locations. A teleportation vessel. All right. Travel communication, high center interference, and high position. Oh, it's there. So we're good. Half pipe lines of 6 over lines of 1. Symbolism on the high center interference of 0, 1. Point lines of 1, 1, 6 in travel. Is it there? Is it position? Nope, the 6 isn't there. So I have to put it again, right? So now you can see it. All right. Line conditions of ground centers, lines of 0 point lines, ozone line, and all lines of communication of stratosphere. Now the stratosphere, sorry, line screen adaptations and flux lines, process communication of ground lines and symbolism, crossing lines in its primers, and 3 track location to its system. It's there through tractions, right? Change it online course to offline communication setting, on circuits and all lines of communications. Directing communication lines of flux into your magnetic highways and travel. Done by equation, all right? So all you're doing is you're creating structure, you're creating schematics and screen lines adaptations. Now we're going to go through decimal points. Let's get position location at times. Let's get into divisions, and let's get into all positions and multiplications. Equals lines of 2 and tractions. All right. All right. X division. Dividing. All right. So dividing is an online setting in 3 lines of circuits and tractions in 3 different directions. All right. Now that's what divide is. Dividing this way, or dividing this way through mass. Okay. Now to and from, X equals lines of 1, 1 equals lines of triangulation, triangulation equals lines into Fibonacci screen lines adaptation. Process communication lines, flick the switch, and travel communication high centers. Allocate the line frames, high center interference, line position location to a system, A track, equal lines of core line centers into position of 2 processing, set core lines, calculation lines into all position location of plus line, and equal core centers, directing line signals and modification. Okay? So you set communication lines of grounds, set position lines of center, and position lines of routes, and routers, the line communication lines of tubing, and 2 track location. All right. Directing core centers, line communication lines of earth, center lines of setting, and position lines of space. Space communication ground centers serves its communication system all through tractions, all through directions in solar communication setting. All right. Over cross line and 45 split lines of anomaly. Okay. Split lines of anomaly. Okay. So I'm showing, oh, it's not there. I got to do it again. All right, so it wasn't ready for you guys to see it in tractions because it disappeared in front of your eyes. Oh, it's not there again. Let's do it again. All right, until it recognizes your energy. Is it there? There we go. All right. Okay, so identify the platforms, know exactly what you're doing through data processing. Is it there in traction? Good. So you have platform 1, 2, and 3 lines of measure that communicates the system. Then we allocate time frames. Track its communication lines of zero gravity and 2 lines in position location of flux. 2 structure line division, right? Communicates the high center interference, line structure in high setting communications. Laser tractions. Now, it's really interesting when you keep bringing it in and line directs to location of traffic and inventory. Communicates the ground centers into position locations of 1 and position of 2 over cross locations in cycles and outline divisions and 4 spectrum lines and security lines measure. Input, output, 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 input. Okay? Now, getting in that communication high center interference, you bring it out through equations and tractions. But you see it in the lines of calculation setting through traffic inventory, right? You see it in there, right? You bring it in again, and then you add line screen adaptations to all levels of blue. Blue plasma lines over cross location, outlined, inline, outline, outline, inline, inline, outline, inline, in set position. Bring it out through equation, change the rotors and routers in set position. Change communication lines of traffic flow. Let's communicate lines of gold. Gold lines of 1, 3 lines of tractions, 4 lines of signals in set position. Bring in line position location high center. So you got 3 lines of flux over screen lines of adaptation. Process lines of indication system. Bring in out track locations. You exceed thousands at position location high centers. Directing line position location to its system all through traction. See it above? Right there. Sets communication high center interference to 2 lines of flux. Ground line symbolism line communication high center interference of a mothership. And track communications to all energies in a set position. Very complicated stuff, but all lines of communication of 4 lines of communication setting and travel. Okay? Directing lines of 4 line signals puts all communication setting all through operation. All right? All right. So we understand the traffic, the inventories, and the flow. Remember how we get in position location to a system all through center calculations? Well, it's the same thing, right? You just have to really understand how to use course line communication setting and track lines of decimal points. 0 point lines of graph, 0 point lines of 1. Remember, it's all about understanding. If you got a 1 indication, split that in half. What do you have? What do you have? Primer. See what I mean? 1 symbolizes lines of directions, 1 symbolizes location setting, 1 position lines of east, and 1 position lines of west. Okay? What happens if you split that again? Let's split it in 3 triangulations, right? Then you come into position lines of high center interference of 1 cycle, 1 center, 1 system, right? Primary circuits lines of high center interference of 0, 3 line cycles in setting, right? Process communication lines of 3 zeros, sets position location of past, present, and its future adaptations. Weighted on signals and line core centers and laser track centers into lines of Skynet sky grids, process lines of west, process lines of east, process lines of presence, and 4 lines of communication. Okay? Directing communication lines into your pyramid and track location. Now, communication ground centers offlines its communication setting to a top rotation screen. Directing core line communication setting to offline communication screen to set position location to its wings. Setting communication high center interference, flux over 1, flux over 2, and track location. Directing core line centers of pi and generation screen. Process communication lines of sonar, open signals into modification system, all through line calculation setting into your satellites and travels in communication. Okay? Sets cross-line signals, coordinates and lines of 1, 3 lines of 4, 6 lines of 8, and travel. That's their through equation, all right? So it's amazing what you can bring in through factors, core centers, at decimal points. Now, it's very complicated stuff, but you understand all it is through skyline grid and set position of zeros and seconds. Nanoseconds. Okay, we got nanoseconds lines, seconds over minutes, and minutes on hours. Okay, nanos set position location at high centers, right? Tether lines of 1 and position lines of 3 track location of coordinates, directing align position location at all levels. X marks the spot. There's Jupiter in set position to its operation, and 2 lines of waving in set calculations. There's the planet, right? Now, it gets complicated, right? Because you're trying to understand what's going on through pi factor into E factor core centers and travel in point line communication setting and travel. Calculate and modify into line condition settings, puts all metric lines into calculate and modify and track correlation system and travel. 3 lines of indication systems, A lines of track, B lines of system, C lines of centers, into DX lines of 1 in position of 0, 1, set position of 0, 0, 1, and track location. Sets communication high centers into ground shifts and lines of communication lines of anomaly. Setting communication high center interference, Primer circuits and a 4-line split lines of anomaly, setting communication ground centers and shift. Process lines in a 45 angle and a 3-line communications in pi and generation screen lines adaptations. Process over cross location system and communication high centers near satellites and travel. Hoo-ah. Gets more complicated, but a lot more fun in lines of traffic inventories. Okay? L lines of track. You see the L lines of 7. 7 lines of 1 line, position location of 9. Position lines of C over track over lines over 0 over 1 line position of travel. Correlates the system, bring it in closer and travel in traffic inventory. Process communication ground centers and position lines of security. 3-line signals, 1 outline connection. Right? 2 in cycles, 1 outside. 2 inputs, 2 out, 1 output. Okay? Bring it in, change the communication ground centers and 3 lines of tractions. Right? Bring it out again, changes all communication lines of center. Turn it around, changes all communication lines of measure. Turn it around again, turns everything location setting to its system, all through tractions. Directing lines, high center interference, let's bring in green. Green indicates position lines of 3 lines of go, sets communication centers, lines position location of 3 lines of measure, 2 lines of tractions, outline settings, high center interference. Sets calculation screen line, all right? Bring it out through equations, set communication high center interference, directing lines X1001. Now we got a 0 platform and position location to its measure. Scales its communication high centers in travel endpoint line communication system and satellites. Directing core centers puts all communication lines in measure, scales communication lines in a 45 line flux, flowing direction of time sequence and line screen adaptations all through calculations. All right, it's very complicated, but it's a lot of fun through structure. This is through schematics, guys. Everything is a drawing of schematics. You are the primer of primates. And once you understand the primer, you have to understand the center of you. That puts you in all levels of your prophecies, your performance, your efficacies, and set position lines of travel. And how to understand that through its calculation system. All right, through decimal points. All right, so decimal points is actually creating the satellite and high lines of measure of scale and frequency. Faster lines attract center interference. So it's bringing lines of communication setting high position locations. For example, 10, position of 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, and 3 lines of communications. Directing line signals, right? Now, what happens when I do this? It changes its direction. See that? What if I do this? Right? Let it go. It changes back to its direction. So it's amazing how you basically go up the stairs. Isn't that amazing when you actually get in that position of flux, right? 3 position lines of high center locations, all track location of 10 sequence, right? Now, if I do this, I'm already at the top, okay? So all it is just an angle up. Okay, turn it again, angle up. You're already there, right? So never get in positions that you're at the bottom of anything because you're always at 10 in sequence. Okay, always at 10 in sequence. Okay, I'll show you again. This puts you in position here. This is you going through the steps lines and decimal points lines of 0 and track locations. So from here, you're here. Okay, so all you're doing is basically going around the system, going around the calculation setting of travel. Okay, all at once in a 4 lines of angle. Okay, it's a lot of fun when you understand that. So never get in positions that you're always at the bottom. You're always at the top in settings of pi. Okay. Setting lines of 5 into 6 over cross, 7 over lines, 8 over lines and screen lines adaptations. Directing online communication lines of 3 over cross, 4 lines of symbolism into position location setting, into line position location system, and solar lines communication setting, and solar sails and traction. Okay. Oh, it's not there. Got to do it again. I got to go bold so you can really see it through measure and scale. There it is, solar sail. All right? So getting that communication high center interference is a 4-line communication high center interference. Let's get 4 lines of zeros and track communications. All right? Split lines in a box. 4 communication lines of 0, 0, 0, 1, and decimal point of 0, 1 in set position. Okay, see that? If I do that, what do you have in positions? If I do that, what do you have in positions? Right? So try to get in position of the center, comes in all communication setting of flux, in set position of yin and yang in travel, and 3 lines of signals in track location. All right. There's the flux right here. Set lines of communication high setting. Right. Change in communication high direct signals. You got a ground shift line communication system in travel. Temperature readings, scales, and compass, and screen lines and adaptations of flux. Oh, it's not there. Is it there? Yes, it is. All right. So remember, guys, it's all lines of model. It's all identification setting, how you see the verification code lines, indirect signals and modifications. Ground center lines of 3 zeros in travel. Is it there or does it disappear? It's there. All right. Now, get into the platforms. Overcross location, the platform lines, screen lines of east. 3 lines of 1 over 0 over tractions. Setting communication high center interference. In position location, ground lines, shift lines of anomaly, and 3 track location lines of high center interference of 0. Directing communication lines of overcross line symbolism, and C track location high center interference, and set position of its planetary surface and track location. Oh, it's not there. See? The energy's too fast. I got to slow you down so you can see it in position and measure. Ooh-ah. Done by equation. Core centers lines of 0. Core line centers of 0s are correlation setting and travel. Directing signal lines high center interference puts all communication system, all 3 calculated and modified through your satellites and travel. Set position location of 45 line angle and position location lines of travel. Sets communication lines of tube line communication lines and umbrella and set position location lines of high center interference of travel. Core lines of calculation screen lines. Process communication lines of 3 lines of flux, 4 lines of symbolism, and a 12-line track position location to its setting. Process communication high center interference, 4 lines of signal, 4 lines of system, over crossload signals, line connection setting in position of a swirl, and track location. Oh, it's not there. Traveling too fast, pay attention. It's got to find you guys in energy, it's got to find you guys in balance and travel. Is it there? Nope, it's not there. Let's do it again. 3 times the high centers is just charm. Is it there or is it not there? Oh, it's there. So good travel. Setting communication high center is a tubing, directing lines of symbolism, location lines, 0 line rotation surface, and track location. Is it there? Yes, it is. Process communication lines, energetic domes, directing signals, modification. Is it there or does it disappear? Oh, it's there. Position lines attractions, overline signals in process communication. Is it there? Yes, it is. All right, so we're going through the ground lines, and I'm showing you lines of communication setting when you bring everything back to one number. Sets communication highs of lines of flux, high center interference, lines of travel, endpoint line communication, high center interference, full pipes, directing all symbolism, line track location, half pipe, 2/3, 2/4, line conditions of 1/3, 1 traction, 1 division, 1 location, 1 center, 1 calculated modify, 1 communication center, in position of point center of center operation. Done by equation. Now, what do we have in track communications? What do we have in track location to a system? All through setting in a 45 line angle. The communication high centers. Oh, look at that. It all disappeared. Oh, what happened? You didn't catch up to the energy line. It went too fast in line signal. See, it's all disappeared because it doesn't recognize you through setting. So I got to do it all again because it's too slow. You guys are not catching up to the anomalies. Let's go through the half pipe, full pipe, core lines, high center interference pipe, direct lines, communication lines, and parallels of pipes, indirect signals, in lines of process communication setting, and 45 split lines of anomaly, and 0 track location. Is it there? Nope, it's not there. Let's do it again. Oh my gosh, you guys are not catching up to the energy. It's too fast in position locations because you have to understand everything is down to one number in set position locations. 1 equals the lines of high center interference, all lines communication lines of existing, all lines of screen line adaptations of flux. That puts everything in communication setting because 1 plus 1 never equals 1 in set positions. Never equals 1 because it's going too fast in tractions. Hooah, done by equation. All right, there it is in travel. All through calculation. Hooah! Now, bring in line sights. Core line centers of blue. Core lines of blue and defaults lines of 1 cycle, 1 symbolism, 1 decimal. Hey! Bring in communication high center interference of red. Overcross with inside line cycles at decimal points lines of 0 and traction. Hey! Overcross locations, which basically puts everything on standby. That's going to green is center communication system. So it's calculation modified. Hey! Now we bring it out. All right? Puts everything in lines of communications on standby. Cancels, delayed everything in location to its system. You see everything in measure of 2 scales and communication lines of swirls. Coming out through traction. Set position. Back in equation. Back in setting. All through traction. So getting that position location, how you see through all levels, gets you to understand more levels on set position. This helps you and guide you and understand how to use that through modifications, how you see it in your primers and set position. All lines of communication, okay? So when you guys get data, when you get informations, when you get all lines of imprints, communication, high center interference, or anything in processing, you understand the uplinks and downloads and upgrading systems to your uploading system interactions, all through your primers. And that's what's given to you and the brain circuit and travel. Brain interprets everything in line, screen adaptations of flux and communication high center for location setting decimals. Point lines of graph. Now go into division location setting, into direct signals, into plus line communications. Let's go into center and correlation setting, into divide, into plus, into triangulation. Okay, let's change that. What do you have in set position with signals here? In set calculations, right? 2 equals lines of triangulation, flux over lines of plus, L line rotation surface, right? Let's change it again. Symbolism, what do you have in track locations? Downshift lines of an anomaly or triangle, plus lines and levels, and line rotations in position of pi. Let's change it again. Set position locations. What do we have in set calculations? 7 plus. Look at that. Change the system, right? 7 plus lines of course centers, indirect signals into one sequence. Look at that. It changed its symbolism. Oh my gosh. What happened there? Whoa, it disappeared. 7 plus 1, 1 plus 7. So set lines of 3 angles in set position. Correlations of plus and 4 angles in track location. Overcross symbolism 5 sequence and line direct signals into primer circuits in set position of center. Process calculation grounds into line communication lines of measure in set position. So calculate and modify line track location system all through travel. Okay. All right. So we process lines of data, process lines of symbols, process lines of zero and track location, all through data, right? Data formation lines, ground centers, line position location. Yay, there's an XT1000. All right, so you process here, you're here, and you're traveling, right? That's you. You're at the bottom, right? So you set a data processor into an XT1000, all right? All right, in that position lines, the calculation setting comes over here, data file 1 in set position, okay? Scans your system in set position to the mind setting, okay? Process lines, calculations and high interference, pick up all levels of the PIP into an open window of an open sequence in set position. Okay. Now, process calculation lines, file lines of C. Okay, it's an XT1000. Modification lines, verified, noted, line position location, your signature. You have to add your signature line screen adaptations in flux. That puts import and export and communication line distributions and travel and communication graphs into data processing communication. All right. Calculate and modify line communication lines outpost in position location outgoing messages in 3 tractions. In position locations back to the XT1000. Sets communication high centers. Let's flick the switch and communication ground lines at T reception screen lines adaptation. All right, change communication again in fly lines, course centers, lines of travel. Indicate processors. Process lines of 1, process lines of 3, process lines of 6, and travel. All right, let's change it again. Process lines of primer circuits, lines of primates of travel. Okay, process lines XT1000, process lines XT3000, process lines of XT4000 and travel. Okay, communicates high center interference and ground center location shift. All right, process again, shift lines of anomaly and cross location system of diversion. Center core line settings, cross line symbolism, cross line communication high centers, window frames, track frames, directing frames, central frames, main frames, correlation frames, and center communication. Very powerful stuff all through travel. And that goes on your skyline grid every second, every minute, every hour of decimal points in travel. All right. So understanding what's going on with your skyline grids and your panels and communication high center interference, you have to understand how to use the decimal points. 0 point lines of 1, 0, 0. Set position lines of high centers of 0, position lines of 1. Or position lines of 1 equals lines decimal point over 0. Okay, or position lines equals lines of 1 in position locations underscore over 0. Okay, sending communication high center interference. Once you stand the metric core centers, it travels its position location on its own sequence, own panels, crossing lines, crossing streams, and 4 communication setting to travel. Cross lines, calculation lines of 0, position lines of 0 over 1, 1 position lines of equal line core centers, process lines of 0, in equal lines of core lines of 0, process lines of 1, process lines of 0, process lines of 0, and track location. Directing core centers, line direct signals into modification setting into your data screen. Process lines of process line connections, high center interference, overscore, underscore, 4 lines of sequence, line conditions, 8 lines of signals, process lines of 1, symbol lines of 0, point lines of 1, 0, 0, and tractions. Directing core line settings into solar sails and rotation surface and track location system of its moon and its sun and rotation surface and traction. All these calculations. Right? Sun and the moon, all through equation of zeros and ones. So getting in position of structure is getting in position location how you see through primers and your primates. That's why you have a provision lines of cycles, understand how to use it through track location to its system, all through communication setting, all through primers and track locations of instructions, through schematics. Okay, how to put this all together. All right, so you got to split lines of anomaly, right? Member contact, Jody Foster, trying to understand the primer, right? Well, it's understanding this. Cross intersections, process lines of 1, process lines of 2, process lines of 3, process lines of 4. Okay? Set position locations, see it on a 4-line angle. Process line communication, see it on a 6-line angle. Process line of communications, see it on a 24,000 line angle. So it's about understanding primer of you. You are the center. You never leave the center, right? So process lines of 1, process lines of 6, process lines of 8, process lines of 12. Okay? Then you change the circuit. Then you change the primer. 4-line communication high center, 3-line signals in set position. Okay? Again, change it in line screen adaptation of north, west, south, and east. Sets communication high center interference, flux over 3, flux over 6. Okay? Change it again, right? On position locations on grid. Flux lines of 1, flux lines of 2, solar line screen adaptations and settings of teleportation. Okay, now we'll get into the platforms. Platform 1, platform 0. 0 lines equals lines of 1 equals lines of 0, right? 0 lines of 1, 1 lines of 0, 0 lines of traction. Okay? So that's communication lines, center communication system of surface and traction. Directing core line centers, offline signal, offline ground line, online signal in rotors and routers in position of its earth and track location. Earth line rotation, ground line shift, lines of anomaly. There's your earth and center communication. Okay? Now, platforms lines, tubing system, lines that correlate setting in full pipes, indirect signals of flux location over 1. Setting communication lines symbolize energetic line screen adaptations in position of processing and communication lines over 1. Directing lines of platforms over cross location of screens, cerebral cortex lines and endorphins lines of series A and series B. Directing symbolism lines of core lines of traffic inventory. Process lines direct signals in process communication system all levels. Setting communication lines of a 45 line communication. XT1000 comes in 1 center in position to an XT3000 line screen. Directing core line centers in position location 1 measure, 1 scale, 1 balance. Process calculation lines of grounds, symbolized lines of high interference, 0, 0, and 0 in 3 track locations. Directing crop circles into 4-line signal in position all levels of code weaving and traction. Directing communication high interference in 1, in position of 2, in position of 3, in position of 4, in position of 5, position of 6, and travel. Directing cross-line signals, process lines of 3 lines, communication lines of 3 black holes. Directing communication highest interference and flux location system all through travel and macro location setting, of course. Directing inside line communication setting, process communication highest interference and travel, and recognition system all through calculation setting to ground shift lines of anomaly. Let's bring it in line communication setting to its grid. There's the grid. Process line, there's the panel. Set position, set core lines, there's the grid over sequence, and position of 45 communication. XT1000. Boom. All right, let's bring it in. Boom. Traveling. All right, symbolism lines of track interference comes into triangulation of flux over lines. There's the triangulation. Platform communication. There is your pyramid and track location. Hooah. There is your line communication, symbolism lines cross location system. Hooah. Sending cross line communications over cross location, high center interference, travel. Directing communication over cross location in center of operation surface and traction. Hooah. So getting in that position location is bringing these in scan lines, directing all communication centers into primer circuits in travel and communication lines of settings all through operation surface and satellite direction. Yeah. So it gets more tricky when you understand decimals because you're now coming to skyline grids. Setting platforms are 1, 2, 6, 8, 12. All right. 0 correlation, 0, 1 correlation, 0, 0, 0, 0. Set position of 1 correlation, that's setting. Process, oh, look at that. It disappeared. Whoa! There it is, 0, 1. See, it disappeared and now reappeared. All right, so if it's going too fast, it doesn't recognize your energy. 3 lines of cycles, cross lines of 3. All right? 0 correlations, process line communication lines of 0, process lines of 1, position of 0, 0, and 3 lines of 0 on traction. Okay, waving line signals, electrical line grids, electrical line panels, electrical line fencing, and travel and position of waves. Directing core lines, high interference alpha, position lines of delta, position lines of theta, and position lines of omega, and position location of zeta, set position location high interference of zeta, communication high centers and communication lines omega, communication high screen line adaptation of flux, and vega, and communication screen lines adaptations all through traction. Vega. So we understand all communication high center interference location setting and set calculations. Track communication lines, indirect signals, and modification ground locations of ASCART and trackage. Flash lines, screen lines, adaptation, all levels. Wall sequence, line panels, high center interference, high position location calculations. Tracking core centers, line communication, high center interference, high position travels. Point lines of 0, point lines of traction, point lines of 0, point lines of system, and set position. Laser tractions, high direct signals into modification ground communication lines of high center lines of pi. Directing core centers into center communication of center operation of center surface and track location. Communicate high center interference and position location to a system all through travel. That's not there, see? Got to see it in travel, see? Now it's there, right? You got to see it in travel. Is it there or did it disappear? Oh, it's there, we're good, all right? So, it gets more complicated, guys. It really does when you understand decimal points. Bringing everything down to one number, right? So let's go in sequence. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Now, when we go to 0, we split the 0 in an anomaly. Comes in 2 tractions and a 4-line signal, right? 3 primer circuits, past, present, and future, right? Change cross-line signals and measure. Scale balance through its energy line. Core lines communication to its eye line. See the eye? Holy moly. Getting communication lines as center in rotation surface and traction to 4-line measure. Scales communication ground centers as surface and track location system, all through energy line screen adaptation of 0 gravity. Done by equation. All right. Metric meters of scales, ground shift lines, in process communication lines into all levels. Microshifts, core line centers, metric core lines and communication screen lines, adaptation of surface into data formation settings and cubes. Directing lines of symbolism, cross location of grounds, and core lines high interference of Merkaba. Directing signal lines of modification ground centers of surface and track to its communication system center calculations. Directing core lines high center for line rotations, inner line rotations into I-line circuits and travel and communications. Setting communication high centers of platforms, setting line core centers into 4 lines of measure, platforms A, B, and D, and C in traction. Over cross locations, right? Mechanism line high force, tether lines of communication, ground shift lines of anomaly, set lines of earth, and rotation surface and platform of transits and divots and set position of 0. Sets correlations ground centers, lines of flux over line, center lines of nothing, center lines of nothing, center lines of surface and track creations, nothing and travel, and direct signal. Setting communication high center interference, flux over 1, flux over 3, flux over 6, and position lines of travel. Uh-oh, it's missing through set position because we're going to high list frequencies. So I got to add the tractions and all direct signals and modification ground, center lines of communication setting, and center communication lines of decimal points of 0. Setting communication high center lines of travel and make a location setting, Merkaba, tesseract, and tetrahedron. Oh, the ground's missing. Now I got to do it again. Set communication high center interference, higher frequencies, line direct signals, and modification. Is it there or has it disappeared? It's there through traction. Hooah. I'm showing you how it blips out. Right? If you can't see it, it goes dark. Right? Until you measure your scale, your balance, your primer, and your primates. Puts all communication lines at decimal points, bringing everything back to one number and check locations back to 0. Split the 0, it come into your primers. Done by equation. Okay? So that's what it is. Everything that you split through 0 becomes its primer. Oh my gosh, this makes a lot more sense now, right? Then you understand the panels. Okay, the panels, guys, right? The primer, right? So when you split a 0, you automatically come into 3 circles, 3 centers of 4 line communications, right? Then you come into laser line, crossing line signals, cross locations, downshift lines anomaly, or cross line communication, right? Setting lines at core centers, offline communications, online communication, off correlation setting and travel. Changes communication height centers, position location levels, and metric meters of scale. Ground center lines of symbolism, cross location lines, and platforms A, B, C, DX lines of 1, E lines of rotation, center, and communication. Another UFO in setting, all through travel, right? But you don't know what it is because it's a higher frequency of primer, right? So I'm trying to get you guys to understand how all this works in travel. Look, it's that position, right? Look what it did by itself. It moved its system by itself. See? Boom, by itself, by its intelligence, by itself, by its primer, by its primates, by itself, right? It stays in setting, so it stays in position, right? So again, I'll do it one more time. When you split 1, okay, you come into this set position. You're splitting the 1. Now you come into the primer of 3. You have that past, present, and future of primer. The circuiting line grounds sets position of 0, sets position of 0, sets position of 0 of gravity. It's set position to your magnetic highway and track locations setting that puts all processing you in track location. Now, when you get in that position locations, you're connected to your Earth. Rotate the surface and line position location of 4 lines of measure. Scales communication high center interference of travel, in position line 3 lines of flux, 3 core centers, in position location of time sequence, and flux capacitor. Standing communication high centers of pi, over cross location sitting, split lines of anomaly, and track location of a system. Standing communication high centers of position of 1.5, position of 1.5, puts 3 lines of measure and travel in position of mind in conceptual system and accelerates the line position of coordinates, say communication lines of 1, 0, north lines of east, 1 lines of setting position, 1 lines of south, set communication lines of core line communication of Pluto, and set lines of communication highest position, travel calculations. That's my equation. All right? So it's very powerful. What you do when you split an anomaly of a 0, then you come into the primer, then you come into the primates, okay? So in that position, that's your test on Friday. I want you to split lines of anomaly to letters, numbers, shapes, and symbols and create a primer. You're the primer of center. Now you have to understand how to split that in position location to its cycle. When you split a 0, you come into half. Now you understand now why it's so important to understand you through center of operation? So we do this, what do we have in set? You're still in the center, right? We do this, you're still in the center, right? But if you're getting your emotional system, this is what comes in attractions. Confusion. Communications of past, present, future. Now, it changes its own symbolism and comes into Quebec. A lot of confusion there. Sets off your planets, sets off your division, sets off your locations, sets off your coordinates, and set positions to your satellites and track communications, high setting. Your satellite's off position. But you see the split lines of anomaly of the primer, right? Right? The central system is all over the open panel. Remember truth and false narrative? Well, that's where it comes into the primer. Okay, so getting into position locations, anything through a triangle, split it. Anything through a square, split it. Okay, anything through a circle, split it. Anything through a 1, split it. Anything through a 2 in position. Now 2 gets a little bit more complicated, right? So how do you split lines of a 2, right? So it's basically understanding all primer circuits has its line core centers in position of center communications of view. So let's get into this. There's a 2 line settings, but there's also 2 lines of attractions. So if you add a loop, you got quantum interference. Through an XC1000 platform communication of grounds and crop circles and tractions and 4 lines of measure and travel. XC1000. Process lines of 2. Communicates ground centers and shift lines of anomaly and code frequencies. Code configures system and line position locations, all lulls, that puts all communications in crop circles in traction. Your Earth, right? XC1000 platforms out through equation to 3 lines of measure and set position. Travel point lines, laser tractions into 3 lines of communication and setting. Process line direct signals, process line communications back to its moon and travel. Hoo-ah. Change the shift lines of anomaly, sets communication ground center location setting to your pyramids and track location. Setting direct line signals into your mountain centers and high position location of travel. Mountain. Directing line course centers, line communication of flux over lines across location of screen. Directing lines of course centers, 8 lines of symbolism, 8 lines of tracks, 8 line division, 8 lines of locations, infinity line screen adaptations of existing all at once in travel and set position. Cross line symbolism location setting to planet surface and track locations. Polarities, core lines of 0, 0 line cross, 0 line division, 0 line rotation, 0 line service, process calculation, high center interference, and position location in your system, all through track location system in your pyramids and set calculation. Process lines of 1, process lines of 2, process lines of 3, and measure. Okay? Pyramids. See it? It's amazing, right? All right. So that's what it is. That's the test, all right? I want you guys to split lines of anomaly. Okay, with 2, how do you split it 2? Right? Well, you just do it back force. Let's do it again. You have to go through the opposites of tracks, that location direct and redirect. One symbolism this way, one symbolism this way, they come together in traction, right? Through 6 and 9. All right, so you do the same thing with 2 and lines of symbol location settings. So you process communication lines of 2 and set position location, right? So you go through the back force of 2 and you go this way in that position location in your system, all through tractions and set position. X 1000 flux up, X 1000 flux down and travel. Okay? Symbolism line cross lines of tubing is screen lines adaptation system of 0, 0 gravity. Process line communication high center interference. Process communication lines of 3 lines of measures and set position location to its tree. Directing symbolism cross location setting to your cloud and set position to location system and travel. Oh, it's not there. Let's go through the brain circuitry line screen adaptation of all levels of the tree of life. Oh my gosh, look at that, amazing. Process communication high center interference, flux over line of plasma screen lines adaptation. Process lines of symbolism location setting, cross line location setting to its happy face and travel. See the face? Hoo-ah! That my equation. All right, so understanding directions and align symbolism, location setting, process lines of 1, process lines of 2, process lines of 3, process lines of 4. Okay? What goes up must come down. What goes down must come up. What goes up must go down. What goes down must come up. All right? Now, understanding that, you got to ground lines of shift, lines of dimension. Once you understand that, you flick the switch, you got 4 lines of communication, lines of parallels. Once you understand that, you have a ground shift lines of anomaly in set position. Right? Division lines of 1, platform lines of 2, 3 lines of tractions, and 4 line division. Platforms, communications, grounds, powers, atmospheres, and highways. Down by equation. Okay? But you got to split everything to become a primer into a primate. And that's how you come into decimal points. Even a decimal point, right? You split that anomaly, right? So it has a primer. Now, when you bring that in close, there's the primer. But you have to understand the panels. There's panels on both sides, right? So you create that through line communications. This is what it is up close. And when you bring it in closer, you see it through a traffic inventory, which is intersections. Process lines 1, 2, 3, and 4 setting, right? Sets communication lines of grounds, but you have to go through 4 split lines of anomaly. 4 lines of correlation setting because it's in rotation surface and track locations. All levels existing in times continuance and all formation system of ground communication setting of operation. Oh, it's not there. See? That's what I'm saying. It's going too fast. You can't see it until you understand you and your models of the communication system all through coding. Okay? All right. It symbolizes the levels of you and communication with surface, line position locations. Oh, what do we got here? Oh, DNA. Right? Change communication high center interference, location across line communication lines of center. Process communication lines of center, operation zero case setting. Primer circuits in 1 center, 1 traction. Done by equation. Change in all communication ground center lines of shift lines of anomaly. Process lines of 1, process lines of 2. Right? Process lines of 3, process lines of 4. Right? Sets position location setting in process communications. Both side lines of angle. Crosses lines of 0 line, crosses lines of 2 line and tractions. Okay? Tubing lines screen and process communications. Okay? Over cross location system, all through track locations to your system, all through your satellites in set position. Down by equation. Okay, everyone? So that's the test. Take the 0, break in half. Set the primer, past, present, future. Understanding how to use a decimal point is understand how to use an underscore, an overscore, and that position case to a central score. We'll get into higher lines of communication setting once you understand how to use your primers to set position your primates. Okay? Adios.